Hey, this is Grover from PhotoShelter, and I am connected via Skype with Baskow. He's a freelance photographer in Portland, Oregon. And he recently completed a project called Pedaling on the Road of Life, where he rode his bicycle from Portland all the way to the Atlantic Ocean to New York City. That's like a 4,000-mile journey on his bike. The guy is insane. So he used Kickstarter to fund this project, to raise the money to actually do it. His goal was to raise $2,000, and he ended up with slightly more than that, thanks to 39 different backers. And raising money for a project is a challenge for most photographers. Ellie was able to fund his project through a concept called crowdfunding. So PhotoShelter recently produced a free research guide called Crowdfunding Your Photography Project, which is a 31-page free downloadable guide all about alternative funding sources for photography projects. You can download this free guide at photoshelter.com/mkt/research. Now, I wanted to talk to Ellie about his project, and I'm dying to hear some of the stories from the road. So Ellie, thank you very much for coming on here and chatting with me.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to be here.
So let's start off. Tell me, how did you come up with the idea for this project?
Grover, I'm not going to call it a midlife crisis because I think more than anything it was just, you hit those bends in the road, and I think you either respond to them or you don't respond to them, and this was one of those transition points. It was going to be a one-week ride from Spokane to Glacier, and I had nothing scheduled for the summer. I had really no hard plans for the summer. I had a couple weddings scheduled for the fall, and all of a sudden it was suggested to me, well, why don't you just go the whole way? And I think more than anything, it's, I don't know, it's ego, it's bravado, it's whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'll pedal the whole thing. I'll go all the way across, So
Had you ever been, were you an avid biker before this?
Yeah, I've been cycling on and off for years, and I had been commuting for the last 6 months before the ride, but about 15 miles a day. So, but I'd never done an overnight, never traveled with gear or a trailer or anything. So I'm not really quite sure what I was thinking. I think there was just some sort of craziness about the whole thing, and it came together just incredibly quick. I started talking about it in March, and the project I left in May. And some people will take a year or two to plan these sort of projects, and sometimes in life you get an opportunity and you take it or you don't take it, and I learned a long time ago just to say yes and then worry about the I don't know, maybe the consequences, but fill in the details later. On more than one occasion, somebody would say, "Hey, do you want to summit Mount Hood with us?" I'd say yes. I'd never done it before. Do you want to fly down this river, in these crazy rapids? Oh, okay. And now I'm even more apt to do that because I have this even greater appreciation for living in the moment. And
yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So,
well, let's talk about your experiences with Kickstarter. How did that go, and would you ever consider using it again?
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine, Don Levan, that I went to photojournalism school at Florida with, lives in New York now, and that was actually my end point, was his house, which was fantastic. And I'd never heard of Kickstarter, and this is before PhotoShelter and your guide came out. So I'd never heard of Kickstarter. I didn't know what Kickstarter was, but the gist of it was I needed funding, and I you know, being a poor photojournalist, and I was working retail part-time, I didn't have a lot of resources on hand. But what I did have was an old bicycle, you know, some old bike shorts, and you know, I had my whole theory was I have everything I need at this point to make this ride. Maybe it won't be as comfortable, maybe it won't be, you know, as, you know, fancy as some of the other rides that other people have made, and you know, but I had, you know, I had an old 20D and a couple of old lenses, and I was going to make the ride. The beautiful thing about Kickstarter was I was able to get more of the things I needed and be much more secure in knowing that I was going to be able to complete the project. It gave me a little bit of sense of security. And partly too is I didn't shoot too high. I knew that $1,000 would have been fantastic. So, you know, but you know, 5,000 would have been spectacular. So, you know, I was trying to be realistic about it, and frankly, the first couple of weeks I was pretty scared. I really didn't think I'd even get close to the goal. It was kind of a slow build, and I think that,
yeah, this brings up an interesting question. Is about motivation, you know, and what kept you motivated, and I'm wondering if the fact that you had all these backers, did that give you added motivation to continue going? You know, did you ever get to a point where you're like, oh man, enough?
Oh,
but then
yeah.
you think of the backers and you're like, oh, I can't let them down.
Absolutely. And you know, you and I have talked about that before. I tried to quit probably twice within the first week, and you know, most of it is just, you know, more than anything, it's shock to the system. You go, you know, I went from riding 15 miles a day to 50 plus miles a day, pulling a 40-pound trailer, which, you know, was partly my fault. You know, I'd never done it before, so I overpacked. I did, you know, there's a steep learning curve early on, you know, but, you know, the motivation not only comes from inside, because I think once the physical nature of adapting to the ride kicks in within a week or two, it ends up being really a psychological ride more than anything else. Keeping your head in it, getting on the bike every day. You know, when you don't feel like pedaling, well, you're not going anywhere if you don't pedal. You know, so a big part of it is psychological, and it's being out on the road all by yourself day after day after day. You know, and I think one of the wonderful things that happened for me, the transformation that happened for me was, I don't know if I was ever really great at being alone or, you know, by myself all the time. I really gained a real appreciation for that along the way, and you learn the difference between being alone and being lonely. But as far as, you know, the Kickstarter backers comes into play, you know, the first couple of weeks were really hard. It was raining, it was cold. This was late May in the Northwest. It was brutal. I'm climbing hills and I'm getting flat tires, and you know, I'm not a happy guy, and I needed those people, and I knew that they were in my corner. You know, guys like Craig Mitchell-Dyer here in Portland, and you in PhotoShelter. I mean, absolutely. If not for those people, there was a good possibility that I would have, you know, faked a knee injury or something. It was hard. I was trying to come up with something. Trust me, I had a lot of time to think about it.
Well, you also came up with, I mean, you mentioned just a few seconds ago about how you overpacked. And so, you know, in terms of camera gear, that usually weighs, I mean, a lot. So what did you end up using for camera gear?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're pulling, it was a self-supported ride, so everything that I brought with me, I had to pull, and I pulled it in Bob trailer and up and down hills and here and there and everywhere. A big consideration was gear. I knew I didn't want to bring 2 or 3 camera bodies and 3 or 4 lenses and and batteries, blah, you know, all the accoutrements, everything that goes with it. I contacted John Combs at Pro Photo Supply here in Portland. He provided me with with a Canon G12 point and shoot, and shot on RAW, and I made the whole project on the one point and shoot camera body, and I got to say, all the photographers here that have seen the project so far think the images look fantastic. The camera performed incredibly well, incredibly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your images. You know, which of the images that you made along the way were ones that that turned out to be your favorite? What do you really like?
Wow, yeah, gosh, there's so many, but like I'd never been to the gum wall in Seattle, and there's a great picture of me with the gum wall, and I had kind of a piece of gum coming off of the wall, which I thought was, ended up being a really fun little moment. I ended up at a high school graduation in Spokane, where this graduate is in front of a fountain, and he's doing this kind of, I don't know, it was kind of this religious moment kind of thing, and that ended up being terrific. Just happened, I made it to, I went up to the Great Lakes, and I spent a little time on Lake Michigan. It was utterly spectacular, and the sunsets and swimming in the water, and it was incredibly cold, 55 degrees, and so the scenic wise was spectacular. But the people, I met this crazy guy named Smitty one day in the Upper Peninsula, and then stayed with him in Port Huron, and he decided to buy this muskmelon. He was a sailor, and he said he didn't want to get scurvy, so he rode around town with this muskmelon all afternoon, and it was just the goofiest thing. We ended up in a bar, and he puts a hat on it, and it was just the craziest stuff, and a million memories. And then, in the end, I ended up in New York City and stayed with my friend Dawn, and they had a wonderful Seder dinner that I got to be a part of, and then just, the interesting folks in New York. So there's so many, every picture to me, it's a silly thing, every picture does tell a story, and the people I met along the way, I'll never forget.
Well, what are you going to do with the images? I mean, are they going to be published anywhere, or are you going to do something with them? What's next for those images?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just about through with the edits, working images. Obviously, they're gonna end up on my PhotoShelter website. That's clearly the first thing. And then in the end, I think I'd love to put a book together. Coupled with the images, every person that I photographed, I did my best to get a life quote or a life philosophy, pedaling on the road to life. The idea is, maybe I'm not quite sure what life is going to bring. Maybe people out there on the road in their world have a great thought or philosophy of how they're living their life, and maybe I can take that back. So the idea is to put a book together with these, match them up with these great life quotes, and who knows from there. I mean, I think it'd be a great photo package for magazines or what have you. A gallery showing would be wonderful. I don't know. I didn't set out to make a lot of money on this thing. I just set out to try to figure out my life, and maybe it helped. Maybe it helps me and many other people at the same time. So
one thing I want to know: did you lose any weight on the project?
Crazy enough, I literally lost 20 pounds on this ride. I call it the 50-mile-a-day bicycle diet, and the crazy thing, Grover, is that I ate like a pig. I mean, if somebody was recording me on this trip, mostly what they would probably have seen is me eating. I mean, it's, how people, drive their car and eat all the time. I learned really well how to eat and bicycle at the same time. I mean, I just, and I could eat anything I want. It was unbelievable. The hardest part now is to try to ramp it down, because I'm not cycling 50 miles a day. So, You know, I want to keep, you know, I haven't been this fit in years, so I'd like to try to keep it if I can.
All right. Well, do you have any advice for anybody who's looking to, you know, use Kickstarter or an alternative funding method? You know, what did you learn along the way about this type of funding that you could share with others?
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage anybody that's considering a project to tap into Kickstarter or any of the other funding platforms. Honestly, I don't think I could have made this project happen without the backing of Kickstarter or another funding platform. And you know, it's in my mind, it's already spurred me on to consider other projects, and now I know that they can become a reality. You know, you don't need a whole lot of money to make these things happen, but you definitely need a certain amount of financial backing. It's just, you know, you got to eat, you got to sleep, and you got to get to wherever it is. So, you know, I would encourage anybody to tap into those resources and you know, make it a reality. Don't let those things be a barrier to you, because they're not a barrier anymore. I mean, now it's just, you know, whatever personal excuses that you create yourself.
Right. Well, congratulations on an excellent project. I love the images, and I'm glad you made it.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much. You know, and again, in the end, you know, I couldn't have done it without PhotoShelter. Certainly couldn't have done it without Kickstarter. And I know that maybe that's, you know, maybe that, you know, maybe I'm schmoozing you a little, but the reality is, without you, without Craig Mitchell Dyer, without the 39 backers that I had through Kickstarter, the project's not a reality, and I'm pedaling, you know, a couple hundred miles and I'm done. You know, now I've got this amazing project because of it.
Well, you did all the hard work, and it paid off, and I really appreciate your
thanks much,
your time with us.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Absolutely.